are live. So today, and for however long it takes, we're going to be going over the new comprehensive event guide, talking about pretty much everything in the document from A to Z. The plan here, and I'm going to spend some time just yammering as I do, but the plan here is to go over pretty much every page of the comprehensive event guide in order, but also, if anybody at any point has questions, take time to go out of order. Um, a significant portion of the idea here is that with this broadcast, I can go into much more detail than I would in other places, either in lessons or through text. I was deeply involved in the development of this, more so than I've been involved previously in policy development, and so I'm going to be able to speak more directly towards the ideas behind why policy is written exactly the way it is, the thoughts that were being had as changes were being discussed, and the changes that were chosen to happen. So if at any point you want to know why something is the way it is, just ask. Otherwise, I'm going to go through. But Jordan Lacombe says hello, and McFerguson says, is there anything you were hoping for in the new policy that didn't make it / you got pushed back on? Let me scroll through the table of contents here. Let's actually just transition on over to our new overlay. Mr. McCheesy, you have not missed anything other than me buying time for people to show up in the stream. So, I think pretty much everything I'm looking for in the documents exists. There are a couple of things. So, I also have, in addition to having the documents open, I also have things that I'm submitting to FFG as recommendations. A lot of these are grammatical errors or, hey, a sentence was cut off here due to weird formatting. These words should be included. There are a couple of things that are, hey, this wasn't included, policy philosophy has changed, or this is a good example to include, all that sort of stuff. But I don't, there were some elements of competitive policy where my personal philosophies and the philosophies of the team, the organized play team at FFG, were not in perfect synchronization. And so we had very long conversations. I think we spent about a day talking about card manipulation error from the ground up. And we had some very good conversations. Hidden card error and open card error were some of the first infractions that we discussed due to their complexity, and they helped us set up underlying philosophies to apply to everything else that we handled. Like, we spent a day on hidden card manipulation error and open card manipulation error, a day on the rest of gameplay disruptions, and then like an hour on unsporting conduct, because most of them are very straightforward and we already understand what's going on. And then event disruptions was like half of a day. Eldo Geek FR says, is there going to be some translations of this document? I don't know what the plans are for official translations of these documents. I know that the comprehensive rules have been translated into a couple of languages. I know German has been translated, and one of the 3 other languages, Spanish, Italian, or French, has seen a translation of the comprehensive rules. The other 2 languages, I believe, have not seen official translations yet. I would anticipate that in time this also sees translation. However, the English version is going to be the definitional version. And then to answer Starkiller07700, the CPG and RPG are included in one big document. It does make some referencing a little weird because you have the tournament regulation sections 1 through 10 And then in the same document, you have competitive policy guide sections 1 through 5, as well as 2 different sets of appendices. Loku667 says the master event document and tournament regulations had translations to German. This one doesn't have it yet. Yeah, it's possible that translations are done on a per office basis, and so some branches of distribution think that put a higher priority on translations than others. I'm not sure exactly what that process is going to look like. So, I actually just want to get started with the most important part of the comprehensive event guide. I'm curious if any of you can guess what I think the most important part of this 92-page document is. But yeah, go ahead and guess. What do you think the most important part, or what do you think I think is the most important part of this 92-page document with regards to the updates and what we're expecting? So Mayonnaise4242 says the relaxed event guide. Drewsworth1 says separating relaxed and competitive. Mightstone12420 says signature policy. In fact, it is the relaxed event guide. It is the last 2 pages of the document. And it is far and away the most important part. Starkiller0770, will this be on YouTube later? Yep, as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to export the VOD to YouTube, and you'll be able to catch up on it there whenever it becomes available. And there's a chance, depending on how long it takes to get through this, that there will be another broadcast and we'll have more opportunity for folks to ask live questions. So, why is the Star Wars Unlimited Relaxed Event Guide so important? Up until now, all events have been operating off of the same tournament policy. Mr. McCheesy says, can the other streams also be made into VODs? I think every stream we have should be available as VODs on the Star Wars Unlimited Judge Program YouTube channel. Occasionally I might miss one, but most other streams should be available there. But relaxed and competitive events, relaxed being formerly casual tier events, so pre-releases, weekly play, most store showdowns, they are very different in the ideal experience and what players are looking for and what tournament organizers are looking for, as compared to competitive events. What players are looking for at weekly play and pre-release is a very different experience than what players are looking for at competitive tier events like a planetary qualifier. So having separate policy for the 2 of these is very helpful in having a clear distinction. A lot of people ask, hey, what's a competitive event? What's a casual event? What's a relaxed event? Now it's going to be, if you use the relaxed event guide, it is a relaxed event. And if you used the 50-some pages of competitive policy, it's a competitive event. And that should make things very clear. One of the things that the relaxed event guide does is, while it doesn't lay out tournament structure, most tournament organizers at this point who are running trading card games know how to run trading card game events. But how to fix things and how to handle infractions is generally not covered in... They have ideas on how they would do it at their local store. Having policy that they can rely on is helpful. Having it be a 2-page document that is very short means that tournament organizers who might not have judges or who might have their staff or like the clerk as their judge who does not know the game, giving them something that they can very easily focus on and study, as opposed to a massive document, allows them to quickly bring things up to the same level of quality that we're getting from other relaxed tier events from other stores. And so it's going to increase consistency and make it easier for tournament organizers to run these events. The updated level 1 lesson. I believe it's lesson 14 that covers the relaxed policy guide. That is that lesson, should be available now and covers the relaxed policy guide sentence for sentence. I also noticed a small error, so we're going to just go ahead and put in on page 91 that the relaxed policy guide is referenced as the relaxed event guide. You're going to see a fair point of this as we go through this. As we go through page by page, I'm going to realize things. You might ask questions, and I'll refine them and put them into this document so that we can send them to FFG and get things polished up. But if you haven't seen the L1 lesson and you are going to be running any sort of in-store play that is not competitive, you should watch that lesson. It's going to go into way more detail than I'm going to go here. I think it's like a 20-25 minute lesson, so I'm spending 10 minutes per page on this document. It is exceptionally in-depth and I think should help underline the philosophies of relaxed tier play. Essentially, relaxed tier play is if something goes wrong in a game, we fix it. If somebody's causing disruptions outside of a game and the behavior's problematic, you generally focus on education, and then at certain point, some behavior is simply unacceptable, and players should just be disqualified. Education is important, but allowing cheating, collusion, theft, etc. is strictly not allowed. FC Mears says, have these new relaxed standards been added into the L1 or L2 exams? So both the L1 and L2 exams have been updated to account for the changes to policy. When I was developing the L2 exam, I knew that these policy changes were coming down the line and the general shape of them. On the L2 exam, I think I had 2 questions that no longer worked under the new policy, and so they need to be rewritten entirely. But every other question was essentially just removing references to penalty points and updating the answers and explanations to match. And for the L1 exam, it was mostly just changing references to casual tier to relaxed tier. The fundamental philosophy, again, remains the same. And so I don't think that there were any meaningful changes in the L1 test. Starkiller07700 says, I wish I could take the exams again to keep my mind sharp. One of the things that I am hoping to do when I have a little bit more bandwidth, so after I'm able to finish updating the L2 lessons, push those out, after the scorekeeper lessons come out over the next couple of weeks, after the scorekeeper exam comes out, is to spend some time and expand the L1 and L2 exams, because policy is a lot more robust than it is now. Particularly competitive tier policy covers a lot more things that policy didn't cover previously. And so there will be more questions added to the exams. My plan is to create an exam that is available only to level 2 judges that is essentially just the policy questions from the level 2 exam made available to L2 judges who want to test themselves, and similarly make something like that available to L1 judges. Something else that I want to do is, when I have more bandwidth and can expand the pool of questions, create practice exams for both L1 and L2 so that both judge candidates who are interested in advancing could take practice exams to be like, okay, I think I am ready for level 1 or level 2. Let me see if my exam taking, like, let me take a practice exam. If I do well here, that is a good indicator that I'm ready. If I do poorly here, that'll give me some areas to study. And then once you pass the exam, you'll be able to retake practice exams freely because they don't offer a certification. And so you could churn through those a little bit more. However, creating exam questions is not a resource-free challenge. And so if we're able to, for example, hire a subject matter expert, having those practice exams is something that I would have them do. Or we would work on together and create a bunch of questions, because you want to make sure that there's some depth to those exam pools as well, so that there's value over time. Something I have noticed, and this is a tangent, and I'm sure you're all surprised that we have a tangent this early on into the broadcast, but when an exam has a lower cooldown and doesn't have a certification attached, people kind of just corpse rush it. They will throw themselves at an exam unprepared just to see how they do, and will repeat that over and over again. In general, for example, the set mastery exams, which have a 7-day cooldown and have no certification, so there's no cost to failing, those have roughly a 33% pass rate. Roughly 1 in 3 people passes those exams, and that includes people who are retaking the exam, whereas the certification exams have closer to a 70 to 80% pass rate. And, for example, 2 of the big things coming out of this policy update that are covered by the exam, and this is vague spoilers, but one question is essentially about the existence of penalty points, which have been removed, and one is about the existence of the relaxed policy guide. And roughly half of the people who have taken the exam are saying policy or penalty points still exist and that the relaxed policy guide doesn't exist, which means people are being like, oh, let's just see what can happen if I throw myself at the exam. And so you need to have a somewhat robust core of questions for people to answer, even for practice exams, or particularly, especially for practice exams, because people are going to go through that pool of questions a lot faster. And something that you want to avoid is somebody going through all the questions a couple times to the point where they know all of them and get an inflated sense of understanding. And so they're like, okay, I know all the answers to every question on the practice exam. Clearly, that means I am ready for the level 1 exam. Then they get new questions and fail and feel like the practice exam, which they're able to ace every time, did not adequately prepare them when it was their own preparation that was at fault. But let's go back to the top. I do very much like this new cover. It's very pretty. As some people have mentioned, it's frustrating that it looks identical to the rules document. So if you're looking at like a thumbnail, don't know which one this is until you read the words. There have been some questions about versioning. I know at some point we're going to get versioning in here as soon as we have, a second version. We'll just include that in the title off to the side. Pardon me while I drink some of my hot chocolate so I can stay warm inside as it snows outside. So, let's dive into tournament regulations. We're going to just start at the top and go from there. As always, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. A lot of this document is taken from other documents, and so taken from pre-existing tournament regulations and master event document, reformatted, recontextualized, put together as best we could. Some things. Oh, so Ash Ferguson asked earlier, if there was anything that I wanted out of this update that hasn't come to pass yet, one of the things I did want was actually 3 separate files for the tournament regulations, the relaxed policy guide, and the competitive policy guide, so that you could have just the one document that you need rather than this 90-page behemoth. Because right now, if a tournament organizer opens this up, they're not going to scroll to page 91. They're probably going to stop on page 4 or 5 and determine that they've gone far enough. Similarly, earlier versions of the document, before it had this fancy formatting that makes it look pretty, had a clickable or interactable table of contents, which is very helpful in navigating around. And then having maybe some headers or footers saying what document you're in would be nice, but those are things that we've asked for. Starkiller07700 says you prefer one doc. There is a lot of value in having it be one doc. There being less documents to track is, in fact, why it is one document. However, you will never need both the relaxed policy guide and the competitive policy guide at the same point. And I think that it is important. Having them be separate documents makes it easier to keep them separate and to keep the ideas in them separate. I don't know. It's a question of approach. I'm used to also having several different documents and referring to one for tournament regulations, one for competitive policy, one for relaxed policy. And they were, I mean, as you can tell from the table of contents, they were written as different documents because they have repeated section headers, which is confusing. And so if these remain a single document, they should probably be rephrased or restructured so that they are shared. Having them all be in the same place is very helpful. I think a large portion of the confusion that was coming out of the tournament regulations and the master event document previously is that roughly half of the master event document was things that the tournament regulations could cover. The line between what should go in the master event document and what should go in the tournament regulations was very unclear, whereas now, if we look at the competitive policy guide, there is a section on philosophy, but it is, let's talk about infractions at competitive events. Let's talk about penalties at competitive events. Let's talk about how to apply various penalties and remedies. And then let's talk about the details of each penalty and remedy. So the document is strictly penalties and remedies, whereas before the master event document was penalties, remedies, and also some tournament structure stuff. If we go back to the beginning, for example, one of the first things we're going to look at is official, unofficial, and unsanctioned events. I think that was in the master event document, and then tiers of play was in the tournament regulations. Formats was in the comprehensive rules. Tournament structure was in both of them. Event outline was in tournament regulations again. Participation eligibility and leader roles were in the master event document. Material legality was in the tournament regulations. And these are all things that are linked together in what you need to run a tournament. And so they weren't laid out consistently or consistent with consistency. And so there were issues in figuring out how to put it all together. In any case, so tournament regulations and the competitive event guide are to, the goal of them is to make sure that events are consistent. We do have this lovely line here that event participants should treat one another with fairness and respect, honoring both the rules and the positive spirit in which they were created. We can agree that is an important one, and generally that's one that's going to be followed. The next line says, they are expected to have read and understand the most current version of this document and the comprehensive rules. Players are not going to do that. There is, I bet if you at a planetary qualifier asked for players, don't do this. But I bet if you asked players to raise their hands if they have read the comprehensive rules, maybe, God, 1 in 20. I think 1 in 20 has read the comprehensive rules cover to cover, and most of them are already judges. And then if you ask how many of them have read the comprehensive event guide, you'll get judges to raise their hands. But the vast majority will have not read these documents cover to cover. Loco667 says you can read rules. You can. You can even have computers read them to you if you don't like reading them yourselves. But these documents are for tournaments. So we have this disclaimer: information in this document may contradict or may have information not contained in the comprehensive rules. And that this document takes precedence. This is because sometimes tournaments need to do things differently than the rules say they are. For example, game layout things or communication. There will be some lapses in the tournament regulations as polish is added. This is a new and large document, and so it's very easy for things to be missed. I know that reading this, there is a lot that can be refined and polished and make more sense, and there are a few gaps here and there, but I think most of them are covered one place or another, and it'll take some time before folks get used to it. But it also says that official event outlines take precedence over the tournament regulations. This is for official events only. And so if you get a document that says, hey, your planetary qualifier needs to be 30 rounds, that takes precedence over the recommendations and requirements in the tournament regulations. This is because events written in event outlines are designed for a very specific purpose, and the tournament regulations and comprehensive event guide are more general. Loco667 says, haven't read the CEG yet myself, so how can I ask players if they did that? You can hold people to a higher standard than you hold yourself. I don't do that. I hold myself to a higher standard than I hold other people, but you theoretically could hold players to a higher standard than you hold judges. But then we have our lovely little section that just says, hey, FFG might alter, modify, or issue changes to these rules and policies without notice. Their official partners may similarly issue clarifications. In this case, that includes the tournament organizers of official events. For example, Star City Games, Organized Play Events, and Fanfinity may be like, we're going to be running this event in this way. We're going to be deviating from the tournament regulations in this way. They're allowed to do that. Similarly, Cascade Games is able to issue clarifications for this document. Updates to this document are scheduled to be announced on the Friday of each set release. However, that's not a guarantee. That's a hope. You'll notice that this did not come out on the Friday of a set release. It was a little bit after the set release and definitely not on a Friday. However, additional updates may be released on other dates. They particularly call out the legality of individual cards in various formats, which is to say if they ban or suspend cards, they may just release a small update to this document, including that. Also, hey, this is just some legal mumbo-jumbo. It doesn't address local laws. We talk about bribery, collusion, gambling. Bribery and gambling have some laws regarding them. Theft and vandalism, harassment, assault, these are things that are covered in unsporting conduct. This document doesn't take care of the legal aspect of it. You should follow the laws in your local jurisdiction. But we move on, unless anybody has any questions. So far, it's all been relatively straightforward. We start with valid unlimited ID number. This is unchanged, I believe, from the previous versions of the tournament regulations. You'll note that the links in section 2.1 don't work. So I'm going to include that. What page are we on? We're on page 7, and we found more stuff to improve. What is it? It is the link for registering for a UID and Asmo Connect accounts. Fantastic. So, first thing we're talking about is official, unofficial, and unsanctioned events. Official events are those that are published and provided by Fantasy Flight Games organized play and run by an authorized tournament organizer. So, weekly play, and then official, casual, relaxed, competitive, master tier events. The list of these right now, off the top of my head, is pre-release, store showdown, planetary qualifier, sector qualifier, regional championship, galactic championship. Those are the official events. There are a handful of other official events that are weird because FFG just runs them directly at their own events. For example, the stuff that they run at Galactics is official. Unofficial events are those without an event outline. And so side events at destination events like sectors and regionals are generally unofficial events. The difference between an official event and an unofficial event is unofficial events can deviate a little bit more from the tournament regulations. Official events have to follow the tournament regulations because that's part of the definition of an official event. Unofficial events should follow the tournament regulations unless there is a reason to deviate from them. Some unofficial events will be like, yeah, we're going to follow the tournament regulations, except we're going to introduce a new format that isn't supported by the tournament regulations, or we're going to have a different tournament structure. We're going to do double elimination instead of single elimination. We're going to do single elimination right from the beginning of the event rather than Swiss rounds. There are a bunch of different things that tournament organizers can do to make their events more interesting or appeal to a particular audience. These are unofficial because they have minor deviations. Unsanctioned events are events run by effectively randoms, people who do not have a relationship with Fantasy Flight Games and Asmodee. This is frequently going to be something like a coffee shop or a school club running an event. An event being unsanctioned doesn't mean that it shouldn't follow the tournament regulations. It is recommended that you continue to follow the tournament regulations because they're designed to create a positive play experience for your players and attendees. But it just means that there is a lower level of rigor when being compared to the standards because it is even farther away from what FFG is looking at. Alrighty. More hot chocolate. So now we get to the first actual change and update that we have. We have tiers of play. Previously, we had 2 tiers of play. We had casual play and relaxed tier. We had casual tier and competitive tier as the 2 tiers of play. Now we have 4 tiers of play. And if we go to Appendix A, which is on page, I want to say 57. No, I was close. But we have a little chart saying what tier every official event has. So we went from 2 tiers of play to 4 tiers of play to better delineate how policy should be handling things. We moved away from casual play for the title for in-store play, pre-releases, etc., because casual does have some negative connotations that some people don't like, and relaxed is a better descriptor of how people engage. People who are playing at weekly play and pre-release aren't necessarily unengaged. They're just not as competitive, and so they have a more relaxed attitude, hence the title Relaxed Tier. Casual play is kitchen table play or unsanctioned play, generally speaking. However, you can still do unsanctioned competitive play, but playing at your kitchen table or just playing a game at your local game store, hanging out with friends is casual play. Mightstone says, hate that this is organized alphabetically by event type instead of a graduated scale. We talked about it. Having it be a graduated scale would be like, it was a possibility that was considered, and we chose not to for some reason. I think it was because regional championship day 1 and day 2 might have been separated and felt a little weird. But relaxed tier play is going to be your weekly play. It's going to be your pre-release, and it's going to be your store showdowns. It is now also officially an option to have competitive store showdowns. Then planetary qualifiers, sector qualifiers, and day 1 of the regional championship are held at competitive tier. And then the Galactic Championship itself, the main event there, and the regional championship day 2 is held at master tier. Let's talk about these tiers. Casual play, as mentioned, actually just super casual. I don't have a better word to describe it than super casual. Players should follow the rules, should play the game as they're supposed to play the game, but there isn't a ton of enforcement there. It's how people let people enjoy the game, innovation in rules and formats. If somebody wants to play, say that like resources and units come into play ready because it's more fun that way, great. They can do that in casual tier play because it's not an event. It's just people playing the game or using the game pieces to play something that looks a lot like Star Wars Unlimited, but is not necessarily Star Wars Unlimited. Relaxed tier is the first tier of actual events. The goal of all relaxed events is making sure people have fun and want to come back to the venue or to the tournament organizer to come back to the game and play more. As we've discussed, errors and disruptions in these events are covered by the Relaxed Policy Guide. And relaxed events tend to be shorter and have relatively even prize structures. Again, in our appendices, we have charts that say this is how many rounds an event should be. If you have, say, 34 players for a pre-release, you do not have to run 6 rounds with a cut to top 8. This is primarily for competitive tier events. You can still run a 3-round pre-release or a 4-round pre-release. Although I do really like best of 1 pre-releases where you play more rounds. And so like doing something like for every, if you were to normally do like a 4-round best of 3 pre-release, instead doing an 8-round best of 1 pre-release just lets you play more people. And also it means that most people are going to have relatively even records at the end of the day because it is very hard to go undefeated for 8 straight rounds. But relaxed tier. That's relaxed tier. Competitive tier events are generally what we expect out of competitive tier events. These are events that are designed to focus more on testing your skill. Relaxed tier is having fun and enjoying the game and enjoying the community. Competitive tier, having fun and enjoying the game and enjoying the community are still very important. It is still critical that people are having fun. It is still a game. However, a significant focus of competitive tier events is testing skills and game knowledge. And so players are going to be held to a higher standard of play, and errors are going to be addressed a little more directly. They're also going to be addressed a little bit more strictly with a little bit less flexibility on behalf of the judge. If you look at the Relaxed Policy Guide, a lot of the fixes are make it better. Just figure out what makes the players feel good about it and do that. Whereas the Competitive Policy Guide says, okay, here's a list of 17 different options. Which one of these is true? Okay, given that it is an open card manipulation error, which of these 3 preconditions is true? Okay, this is how you're going to fix it. This is what's going to happen to the players. And it's very generally very specifically defined for a lot of things, and so players will be able to get a consistent experience. We don't expect players to play perfectly or have perfect knowledge. Errors and disruptions are going to happen, which is why players get warnings rather than game losses. But they also have deck lists and generally have a cut to single elimination to determine a single winner, usually with top-heavy prize pools, and have invites or qualifiers. And then we have Master Tier. Master Tier is new, and it changes a little bit. We have a couple of small changes in Master Tier. There are like 4 or 5 infractions in the competitive policy guide that say if the event is at competitive, blah, if at master, blah, and players are held to a slightly higher standard in a few specific areas at Master Tier. These are generally 4 infractions that are harder to remedy, and so we escalate to game losses and match losses a little bit more quickly in Master Tier play for issues that are harder to remedy, or impossible to remedy. Furthermore, the difference that is going to be most visible in Master Tier play is that there are additional restrictions on spectators. Spectators at master events are not allowed to speak directly to players in matches to reduce the possibility of unintentional outside assistance. Spectators in general should not be talking with players at either competitive or Master Tier play. However, spectators are going to talk to players, be like, hey, I got you your lunch, or hey, how's your match going? Thumbs up, thumbs down. At Master Tier play, they should be instructed not to do so. Furthermore, spectators are not permitted to stand in aisles. So if you have 2 rows of chairs, in between them, players aren't allowed to stand. Broader aisles, spectators are allowed to stand, but it should generally give players a little bit more space around them so they feel a little bit less pressure. It also makes it a little bit easier for judges to see and attend to judge calls. Mightstone 12420 says, this codifies the concept that you are too good at this game to make this mistake. Sort of. We're going to go on a tangent here. Let me find, what am I jumping to? I think some of them are in gameplay disruptions. So we're just going to jump to the 60s. Alrighty. I think it's generally, let me find, yes, so incorrect randomization. And so you'll note that a lot of the common errors, inaccurate mandatory ability, doesn't say anything about competitive or Master Tier events. Open card manipulation error doesn't say anything about it. Hidden card manipulation error doesn't say anything about... here we are. We do have something for hidden card manipulation errors, which is... this is an alternate remedy for competitive tier events, which is if this is the first time during the event that the player has committed an infraction and the player called attention to their own error, instead of the card manipulation error fix where cards are revealed, we select a card at random. This is a less disruptive fix, and it is more gracious to the player who made the error. But you only get it once, and you only get it at competitive tier. At Master Tier, we go directly to the opponent selecting a card from the set of cards that was affected. And so it's not you're too good to make this mistake, but rather we're going to give a little bit more grace to players at competitive, especially because at competitive, you're likely a player who, or I think the vast majority of players in competitive tier events are playing at planetary qualifiers. I think that maths correctly, given that there are roughly 150 planetary qualifiers per wave. Even if the average is 40 players, that's still something on the order of 6,000 players in planetary qualifiers, whereas the Galactic Championship sectors and regionals combined don't make that number. Possibly in a year, let's say we had 2,000 players at Galactics, 2,300 at Galactics. We have roughly 500 for each sector in regionals, which is 2,000 per wave. So yeah, one wave of planetary qualifiers is about the same as, it's a little bit less than a whole year's worth of sectors and regionals and galactics. But if you're playing in the Galactic Championship, you've already won a planetary qualifier or have played in several planetary qualifiers and earned a lot of points. And so you're going to get a little bit less grace. Where's another one? Incorrect randomization. Incorrect randomization is really hard to undo. A player commits an error by randomizing a set of order cards, such as deck would not instructed to do so. So you're supposed to, you play U-Wing Reinforcement, and rather than shuffling the cards and putting them on the bottom of your deck, you shuffle your deck. There isn't an advantage to... There isn't a way to fix this cleanly. If we're able to identify some of the cards, we can downgrade to a warning. And if this is at a competitive tier event and it is the first time the player has done this and they call attention to itself, the penalty is downgraded to a warning. However, that's generally what you're going to see for the difference between competitive and master tier. There are going to be a handful of areas where it says, if this is the first time it's happened, if we're competitive tier and not master tier, and the player called attention to it themselves, we can downgrade. For example, this is another one with deck error. At competitive tier event, if this is the first time during the event the player has committed this infraction, the player called attention to their own error, instead issue a warning instead of a game loss. That also requires a remedy. So it isn't exactly you're too good to make this mistake, because most of them are not common errors. It's generally, rather than being you're too good to make this a mistake, we're going to increase the penalty, it's for competitive tier events, we're going to downgrade the penalty. DeCaniel asks, is sectors grouped all into competitive for both days intentional and regional is one step up from sector, or should we apply master tier play on sectors day 2? It is intentional. Sectors are intended to be a little bit less. Regionals are a championship where sectors are a qualifier. That is part of the philosophy there. It is expected that the level of competition at a regionals is going to be stiffer than the level of competition at sectors. I know that so far that hasn't necessarily played out. I know that a lot of sectors have roughly the same number of players as regionals, but the idea is that regionals are generally going to be a little bit more competitive, and so day 2 regionals for now is going to be held to that slightly higher standard. Alrighty. Formats. This is going to be updated over time as we add Eternal. Right now we have Premier Trilogy, Draft, Sealed, and Twin Suns. This does not mean that we're going to be getting Twin Suns competitive events anytime soon. They might change their minds on me, but I don't anticipate competitive Twin Suns events soon. This just means that, hey, you can run Twin Suns tournaments, and it is an officially supported format. At some point, Eternal's going to get added in here when it becomes a little bit more supported. That's probably going to be with Set 7 in A Lawless Time. That's a boring section. Tournament structure. This is just a bunch of information about how tournaments should be shaped. So, number of Swiss rounds to be played. Appendix A. Length of time allotted to each round of gameplay. I think that's in Appendix B, and should generally be 25 or 55 minutes. The formats, you should know this. The structure for any sort of progression cuts. What a progression cut is followed by, whether it's more Swiss, such as cutting to day 2 for sectors or regionals, or if it's single elimination, like Planetary Qualifier, what determines the end of a tournament. Tournament structure should be advertised in advance of the event and repeated as part of the opening announcement so everybody knows what they're getting into. Discussing all of these details is not necessary for announcements, but covering the details of being like, hey, we're playing 8 Swiss rounds before cut to top 8, or we're playing 7 rounds before cut to X and 2, etc., etc. Drewsworth says, I'm jumping ahead a bit. Can you clarify the update in 9.2.1? Absolutely. What page is that on? That's on 45. So, can you clarify the update in 9.2.1 regarding changing deck composition for limited, including leaders and bases between games? The section references games, matches, and rounds, along with different enforcement levels, and I wanted to clarify where that is legal and not. Alrighty. So, when playing in a limited format, whether draft or sealed, at any tier of play, in between games 1 and 2, and between games 2 and 3, you are allowed to change your leaders or base. When playing in relaxed or casual limited events, this includes pre-release, you can change your leader or base in between matches as well, which means that at the beginning of game 1, you can have any leader that you opened and any base as you opened as your leader base combo. For competitive and master tier limited events, players cannot change their deck construction for game 1. What you registered for your deck is what you have to present for game 1. For games 2 and 3, you have access to your entire pool, and so you can sideboard into a secondary deck. You can change your leader and base. You are still required to make your sideboarding decisions in a timely manner. Also, I'm noticing that my camera is just a little bit too big, and I need to resize it. And so we're going to get a little... Nope, that's bigger. OBS, make it smaller. Thank you. That better? Great. Now I'm not cut off at the bottom. Anyway, sorry. I got distracted by myself. Yeah. So at relaxed, you can change your leader and base at any time. It's totally fine. At competitive and master tier events, for game 1, your leader and base has to be what you registered, but you can change them between games. Mayonnaise4242 says, an hour into the stream and we've made it through like 3 pages. I think this is going to need more than 2 streams. Well, first of all, we're 53 minutes into the stream, not an hour. And we're all the way on page 10. Look at that, page 10. We are 1/9 of the way through in 1 hour. We should be done. And we already covered the relaxed policy guide. So we're really 12 pages into 92, which makes it, I don't know, somebody do the math for me. That's a solid like 11 or 12%. We only need like 400 minutes. That works out to 6.5 hours. Mayonnaise, it's only 5 pages of table of contents. Okay, so I'm sure it'll pick up. Alrighty, tournament structure, formats, event outline. Event outlines come from FFG. You'll see them if you've run a pre-release or a planetary qualifier, maybe. They are documents that cover the details of the event. Not every single official event is going to have them. They generally should. There is an intent behind official events, which include how prizes should be distributed, whether it is through a specific method or up to the tournament organizer themselves. It includes the tier of the event, the tournament structure if there's a specific one, requirements for staff roles to be fulfilled, including, hey, this event requires a level 1 judge or requires a level 2 judge, and description of utilized variant rules if applicable. And then we get to roles and responsibilities. There are a bunch of different ways to participate in an event. We just say that everybody who is at an event is a participant. Participants are classified into roles based on a person's responsibilities, and a person can have multiple roles. There are some roles that uh, don't quite work, or can't have multiple roles in certain roles, or you are limited into what other roles you can have. For example, at competitive tier events, judges, anybody in a leader role cannot be a player. Everybody can be a spectator. Players cannot also be leaders. But participation eligibility. Let's talk about that. Who can play in what events? So if you're not allowed to participate in an event due to local laws, not allowed to participate in an event. We don't get to overrule the laws. Minors can't play in events unless they have permission from legal guardian. However, if a player attempts to register for an event, that is them giving permission to play in the event. Some places may require written releases, or some tournament organizers may require written releases for minors, but generally, by trying to sign up for an event, a minor and their guardian are saying, we consent to have this player play in this event. Prize eligibility is important. If there are, for example, cash prizes, that is dependent on local regulations. Other individuals may be deemed eligible at the sole discretion of Fantasy Flight Games. This ties into the suspension policy, which suspends players. Tournament organizers are required to enforce said suspensions. Employees of FFG, Asmodee, and its subsidiaries and affiliates cannot participate as a player in official competitive or master tier events. This means that employees of Fantasy Flight Games, Asmodee, and their subsidiaries cannot play in galactic championships, planetary qualifiers, etc. Similarly, anybody who has an event leader role cannot participate as a player in a competitive or master tier event that they are in a leader role for. So that means your tournament organizer, scorekeeper, event manager, administrator, anybody on the media team, head judge, assistant head judge, appeals judge, floor judge, team lead, cannot play an event that they are also working. This is relatively straightforward. This generally makes sense. A lot of these roles have access to information such as deck lists, or the ability to adjust pairings that creates the possibility of bias or unfair behavior. People who have access to special powers shouldn't be allowed to also play in the event because it makes the event unfair for folks. However, what this does mean is that people who are in event leader roles can also play in relaxed tier events. And so that means that you can judge and play in store showdowns, pre-releases, weekly play, etc. That is a change from pre-existing policy, and is one that I'm very excited for because it means that a lot of judges will stop breaking a rule very quickly. Mad Dog Max TV says, how do you even have time to play and work? This is frequently like the store owner wants to play in their event, and since they're the one who's paying the judge or handing out the prizes, they're not actually working the event, but they do have a title, and they do have authority over the event where they shouldn't, or that is unfair to other competitors. And so they're not actually actively working on the event, but they do have authority over the event. Also, if you are, like, say, scorekeeping is relatively low bandwidth except for round turnover. And I can see somebody being like, yeah, I'm scorekeeping. It's very easy for me to also play in the event. I could see somebody who's on, like, a broadcast team who like sets up a camera and is running coverage for an event, also wanting to play in the event and be like, yeah, I know I have access to the deck list so that I can coordinate with the commentators, but I'm not going to look at that in the event. I just want to play. But if they have access to that external information, if they're part of that team, they should not be allowed to play. If you have somebody whose job on site is essentially tech support and all they do is set up the cameras and then they go play in the event, that's fine, because they don't have special privileges or authority at the event, and so it doesn't create a problem. I would encourage against that, because there is the perception of bias if the broadcast team, for example, does have access to deck lists and their friend is on site playing in the event and is setting up cameras, it's very easy for people to be like, hey, why is the broadcast team who has access to deck lists talking to this player in the event who shouldn't have access to deck lists? Not necessarily that they're talking about deck lists, but it creates a possible perception of bias or unfairness that you'd want to avoid. Of course, that doesn't mean that like there are going to be a lot of commentators and judges who are friends with players. That's how it works. When you go to a destination event like sectors or regionals, or heck, even going to like a planetary qualifier, if you're driving an hour to a planetary qualifier to judge it and your locals are also going to play, you're going to recognize your locals there. They're going to talk to you. And while you're in a leadership role and have access to this information, you obviously shouldn't be giving it to them. There is the possibility for perception of bias. But sometimes just closing off some of those windows is just a good thing to have. But leader roles. Leaders are the people who lead and manage an event. This includes pretty much everybody on tournament staff through a bunch of different titles. It is a little bit weird that folks like floor judges and team leads are like, a floor judge is a leader and a team lead is a leader. But the floor judge doesn't lead any judges. They just lead the event. Tournament organizers, there must be a tournament organizer. This is the one role that every event must have, and the tournament organizer is every role that isn't otherwise covered. So if they don't have a head judge and the event needs head judge, they're going to be the head judge. If they don't have a scorekeeper and the event needs a scorekeeper, the TO is going to be the scorekeeper. But the tournament organizer has a lot of responsibilities. They need to get a location. They need all of the materials, such as product. They need to publicize details, manage event staff, maintain the integrity of event and prize distribution, be available at the event location throughout the entirety of the event. If a TO is not able to be at an event, they should have a designated event manager to act in their stead. There should always be a person who can make final decisions. Most of the time, the head judge is going to make final decisions for policy calls, but there are some tournament structure calls that may require the TO an individual to make a decision. DeCaniel suggests event leader instead of leader. Yeah, event leader is definitely a possibility. Event leader roles feels a little bit mouthy, but I'll make a note of that to consider suggesting so that we can clean things up a little bit and make it a little bit cleaner and more intuitive to folks. TOs can deny entry to any participant for pretty much whatever reason, and TO may have a participant removed from the venue and should do so if they've performed any significant unsporting conduct detailed in the unsporting conduct section of the competitive policy guide, but they don't have to. If a tournament organizer wants somebody removed from the venue, even if they have not been issued a penalty, the tournament organizer can have them removed. Note that participant does include staff, so the TO can just be like, nope, you're gone, you're no longer in my store. Alrighty. Scorekeepers. Any tournament event, especially competitive tiered tournaments, should have somebody who is identified as the scorekeeper. This doesn't have to be somebody sitting at a station all weekend or all day, but you should generally have only one person futzing around with the scorekeeping software at any given time. And by having a person be the scorekeeper, you're going to make things just a little bit easier on everybody's lives. Event manager is an optional role and functions as support for the tournament organizer and has all the responsibilities that the tournament organizer has when the TO is not available, and can be delegated a lot of the responsibilities from the TO. At destination events, you're going to see several event managers just because there's a lot to be done at these huge competitive events. We're going to see if we can adjust this mic to make my posture better. Nope, the microphone decides to drop back down immediately. Alrighty. Administrators are also an optional role and can take on various logistical and customer service roles. A lot of this is being info desk, prize distribution, whether it be handing out prizes directly or acting as a prize wall, managing product before distribution. So this is this could be a shop employee in the back who's just setting up sealed kits along with stacks of promos, or the store clerk who's registering players before the event. This is somebody who falls under the administrator role. Media staff is another optional role. You do not need to have coverage, although everybody likes to have a little bit of coverage. This is anybody taking photos, providing commentary, interviewing players, operating live stream equipment in association with the tournament organizer. Note that only people designated as media staff by the TR are considered to be this type of leader. And so if somebody shows up with a smartphone on a tripod and they put it over their match, that does not make them media staff. That makes them a spectator. Where is it? We have spectators. There we are. Influencers in media. You can broadcast your own stuff, but that does not make you staff. Does not make you media staff. Media staff comes with some privileges and authority. But essentially their job is to not provide outside assistance and not disturb games. Essentially their responsibilities are checks to make sure that media don't get in the way of running the event. You may hear horror stories of coverage teams being like, oh, can we get that match that is currently in the middle of game 2 to move over to our feature match area so that we can watch them play, because that looks like a very fun game. It's like, no, that is disturbing a game. Similarly, commentary needs to be kept to a volume where players involved in the match that's being commentated on can't overhear that. And if media staff witnesses a gameplay mistake, they should call for a judge rather than trying to fix it themselves, unless they are also acting in a judge role. Moving on. This is our second required for all events. Every event has to have a tournament organizer and a head judge. Most events should have a scorekeeper. Every event should have a head judge. Head judge should be knowledgeable in game rules and event regulations. They're the final authority for interpretation and application in these matters. Head judges should do everything that a floor judge does. That's step one of being a head judge. Be willing and able to do everything a floor judge does. Issuing final rulings in the case of appeals, ensuring announcements occur. They don't necessarily have to make the announcements. I know that there are a lot of people who are not comfortable on mics, or they do not have the ability to project. Some venues do not have microphones or an audio system, and so you just have to shout, and some people simply do not have the physiology to be able to make announcements that loudly. Head judges are also required to delegate tasks to judge staff. They should perform investigations into player actions and behavior where disqualification may be necessitated. Note that only the head judge has the authority to disqualify participants from an event. The competitive policy guide, of course, talks about disqualifications a little bit. The head judge should be aware of and involved in all game losses or match losses other than for tardiness. Starkiller says, can we change head judge to judge, jury, and executioner? No, because they're not always all those. It's also a bit of a mouthful. But head judges can delegate some of their responsibilities. In fact, they can delegate a lot of their responsibilities. However, head judges cannot delegate appeals, investigations, game losses, match losses, or disqualifications to roles other than any assistant head judges. Hey, look, it's our next category, assistant head judges. Some large events may necessitate the use of an assistant head judge due to their size. All assistant head judges share the responsibilities and exercise the same authority as the head judge while serving in that role, but are directed by the head judge. So an assistant head judge can complete investigations, can disqualify players, can delegate team lead roles, that sort of thing. Appeals judges have So you can probably expect to see assistant head judges at events like the Galactic Championship, and possibly one or two at an event like regionals or sectors. However, at regionals or sectors, you might also see appeals judges. Appeals judges have some of the responsibilities as a head judge. Of course, they perform the duties and responsibilities of floor judge. They're going to be taking calls, that sort of thing. They handle appeals, they handle announcements, and they delegate tasks to judges. They do not, notably, handle investigations, disqualifications, game losses, match losses. So this means essentially that appeals judges are rules focused as opposed to being focused on areas that are a little bit more subjective. Appeals judges should have a very high level of objective knowledge of the rules of the game, and they should be effective in managing members of their team. Assistant head judges and head judges, in addition to having those skills regarding rules, are also capable of more subjective situations that involve interpreting policy, investigating players, these skills that are a little bit harder to pick up and a little bit harder to directly teach. Some events may have assistant head judges and appeals judges, although generally you're probably going to just see one or the other depending on the needs of the event. Floor judges also have a bunch of responsibilities which are echoed across the other roles of judges. Floor judges are expected to be knowledgeable of game rules and event regulations, so the comprehensive rules and the comprehensive event guide, but not be experts. Judges should assist players and spectators. This is the primary way that floor judges interact. This is mostly by answering questions, resolving infractions, and assisting with requests. We have this note that floor judges help resolve disputes between players regarding game state, but do not generally assist in determining the current game state. For example, that means if somebody's like, hey, I think I have 27 damage on your base, and they're like, no, I think you have 25 damage on my base, judge should step in and help resolve that dispute. If a player is like, hey, I have a General Saber and 2 experience counters and 2 damage counters on my 5th brother, how much damage do I deal? That's not something that judges are stepping in to do. If there's a problem or an issue, judges step in. If somebody's just like, I don't want to do math, judge, can you do math for me? That's generally not what judges are for. Judges should answer questions about rules, interactions between cards, tournament regulations, policy, event structure, and the official text of cards. Judges should not intervene before an illegal action has occurred, but should do so as soon as a rule has been broken to prevent the situation from intensifying. And if a player asks to speak if a player asks to speak to a judge away from table, that request should be generally honored. Judges should be engaged in the tournament. They should be watching matches and be ready to assist when a player calls for a judge, and should maintain an air of professionalism and courtesy. Judges should be focused on the task. They should not be trading, should not have personal conversations off to the side where they are not paying attention to the event, should not take personal phone calls, or do stuff that would otherwise distract them from their duties during the event. This line becomes a little bit blurry at the local game store level, where particularly a lot of judges are also store employees. And helping a customer out at the store does distract them from their duties during an event. For something like weekly play, pre-releases, etc., it is entirely reasonable for a store employee to double dip and help customers at the store and run the event. At something more competitive, like a planetary qualifier, a judge should generally be dedicated to the event, depending on the size of the event and the size of the staff. For example, if you have a, let's say, 65-player planetary qualifier that has a head judge and 3 floor judges, and they're 2 store employees, and the store employees are also certified judges, it is helpful for the store employees to step in, but you already have you have a 1-to-16 judge-player ratio without the store employees, and so it's entirely reasonable for the store employees to be continuing to focus primarily on store-based tasks. Whereas if you have, say, a 100-player planetary qualifier with a head judge and 2 store employees, that event is going to need those store employees acting as judges for the majority of the day and not focusing on their store-based tasks. Starkiller asks, if we are walking the floor watching the games as a floor judge, should we say hi to the players if we stop to watch their match? It depends. Sometimes if the players seem to notice me, if they go, who's that person looming over me? Or if I sit down because my legs are tired and it's Sunday and I've been here for 72 hours and my legs hurt, particularly if I'm in a head judge shirt, I'm just like, hey, my legs are tired. I'm just sitting and watching. Or, hey, just stopping and watching your game. Nothing to worry about. Your leaders just look cool. Or this board state is insane. So if the players are in the zone and just playing their game and don't seem to acknowledge or recognize your presence, I wouldn't interrupt them. However, if they look at you and give you a, what are you doing here? Am I, like, if they look at you or if they become nervous due to your presence, just be like, hey, just watching a game, nothing to worry about. So it is more reactive than proactive. I would not proactively just be like, hey, I'm watching your game. Especially, God, I can imagine somebody walking down an aisle just be like, players, just letting you know that I am watching your game. I'm watching your game. Don't worry about me. I'm just watching your game. Just watching your game. Oh, that's a very interesting game. I'm watching your game. That would be very disruptive. So it is a hard balance to strike, but over time, you'll learn. It's vibes based. It's very subjective. You will in time learn when players are notice and are disrupted by your presence, and at that point, putting in just a little calming motion of like, hey, I'm here, but I'm not like, neither of you have done anything wrong. I'm not here to, like, this isn't Minority Report. We're not the pre-crimes division. I'm just watching a game because I want to watch. Notably, this is something that was discussed a little bit in the news thread, the discussion announcement thread. But there's this idea of, let's say you are watching a game. You're sitting and watching a single game, and you see somebody, they go, I attack your base with my crate dragon, and the other player has a sentinel in play, and so the crate dragon attack isn't legal. Something illegal has occurred here, and so you should intervene. Per policy, it says judges should intervene when an illegal action has occurred. We've attacked a base with a sentinel in play. Just be like, hey, folks, it looks like you attacked base with sentinel in play, right? Good job on intervening and preventing the game from going further awry. If you catch it immediately, if somebody goes like, attack your base with crate dragon, you're like, hold on, isn't there a sentinel? Before players have the opportunity to fix it themselves, you generally shouldn't be issuing a penalty here. This is because most matches aren't going to have a judge watching them. And if you are out looking, if you're there and you catch something before the player has the opportunity to catch it or their opponent has the opportunity to catch it, it looks like you are hunting penalties and looking to penalize players. And a lot of the times, if, for example, that happened and you weren't present, the opponent would be like, I have a sentinel, you can't make that attack. Player would be like, oh, okay, I'll just attack your sentinel. And the opponent's like, great, dies, move on, and no judge would ever be called. So essentially, there's a line in the competitive policy guide that says if the players resolve illegal gameplay to their mutual satisfaction and it ends up being effectively legal, you don't need to intervene. So if like players resolve it on their own, you don't need to intervene. If you intervene and resolve it before the players have that opportunity, it is important to not be heavy-handed so that players don't get worried about judges watching them. Because if you are more likely to get a penalty and therefore more likely to get a second penalty and therefore more likely to get an escalated penalty such as a game loss simply by having a judge near you, players will not want judges near them and will be made more uncomfortable by the presence of judges rather than being comforted and relaxed. If what you do is you fix the game returns to its natural course, players will be like, oh, thank you, judge, for fixing our game, rather than, judge, why did you give me a penalty? This is frustrating. Mova Domke 5? Mova Domks? I don't know how to say your name, and it's... Anyways, asks, small tangent, but is there any definition or change to something, say a modified 30 base, say the one stack to make a 3D base? So I have... most of my bases are these modified bases. Let's see, we're on page 15. Good to know. Aha! So... we do have material legality, cards. We have this section on artistic modifications and alterations. It says that those aren't legal. However, the head judge is the final authority on what is or is not a authorized card. I would let those bases slide because there is an authentic, at the bottom of it, there's an authentic unaltered card, and it's not going to be in the deck at all, so it doesn't matter that it's marked, and it is there's no alternate art, there's no additional design, it's just the official card art through and through. And so it doesn't run afoul of licensing, but that's my personal opinion, not the official opinion of policy. Policy doesn't allow for wiggle room in that regard. All right, jumping back up to floor judges. So in addition to being professional and maintaining that positive interaction with players, they should escalate issues of unacceptable behavior to tournament organizer and head judge when appropriate. There are some things that floor judges should not necessarily be handling themselves. If, for example, they believe that there might be cheating or if there's unsporting conduct, and it will likely result in a game loss, match loss, disqualification, they should probably bring that to the head judge. If somebody is doing something that is against the tournament organizers or store rules, they should let the tournament organizer know rather than trying to handle these things themselves unless they are specifically delegated to do so. While it is very helpful to have, for lack of a better term, knight errants running around and helping, if too many people have authority and are doing things without support and instruction, you begin to have inconsistent rulings and inconsistent behavior, and gets to be a little bit crazy. And so these more high-profile issues should be handled by the tournament organizer or head judge. The last responsibility of floor judges is to complete tasks as assigned by the head judge or team leads. Speaking of team leads, some floor judges may be assigned the role of team lead and given an area of logistics or a portion of the event to steward. Team leads are in charge of making sure that their assignment is appropriately completed and that judges under their authority are taken care of appropriately during the event. And so there are two parts to team leading: getting the job done and running the team. There's event leadership and there's team leadership. This is just an explicit role so that we can be consistent to naming across events. Team leads can also be consulted. So some large events may say, we want you to consult with people who have a little bit more authority or experience for particular types of calls, such as reversing decisions, gameplay disruptions that require backups, hidden card manipulation errors. These are all things that are potentially very disruptive because either cards are changing zones, information is being revealed, or they're very contentious. They may also make announcements for end-of-round procedures, or, for example, like a side events team lead may make announcements for start-of-event procedures. Team leads may provide mentorship, help refine break structures, and propose logistical procedures. It is a step in the direction of head judging. Then, we have players. Players have a bunch of bullet points next to their title, but they should come prepared. Play Stars Unlimited with good sportsmanship. That's it. Just be nice and be ready. That's all we ask, players. That's all we ask from you. And yet, we're going to detail it just so that we can be a little bit more specific. interact with other participants in a respectful manner, and be honest and provide complete information to event leaders. Communicate in a clear manner with your opponents. Present yourself for play in a timely manner. Please do not be tardy. Bring the appropriate tournament materials to participate in the tournament. Note that previously that this was a little bit more detailed, and then somebody would be like, aha, my opponent has to create some clone trooper tokens, and they didn't bring clone trooper tokens. They're not prepared. Judge, can you solve this problem? Can you solve my opponent? Bring something. And if your opponent has effects that makes you create tokens, or if there's a possibility that you'll create a certain number of tokens, you don't need to have exactly everything, but you do need to be generally prepared. If you notice something go wrong, you should call attention to that. Calling attention does not necessarily mean calling a judge. If you notice a rules or policy infraction in your match, you should bring attention to it and be like, hey, opponent, here's a problem. If you and your opponent have an issue, call for a judge. This is the next bullet point. Seeking the assistance of a floor judge if unable to amicably resolve a game disruption in their current game. While I don't want generally, even if players can amicably resolve a game disruption, I want you to call a judge. But if the two of you can come to something, you don't need to call a judge. Report your matches accurately and in a timely manner. And if there's an error, let an event leader know. Let an event leader know in the case of any unsporting conduct or any attempts to undermine the integrity of the event. Abide by the eligibility restrictions of an event. You are expected to not register for an event that you know you are not eligible for. And then be aware of the contents of this document. We know this one isn't going to be true. DeCaniel asks, how hard are the roles to be followed with FFG Cascade here? In other words, in the future, will the document consider judge levels for delegating harder calls? If I have an L5 visiting, I'm happy delegating appeals and backups, etc. That's an interesting question. I believe that the judge levels will not be explicitly referenced in the comprehensive event guide or the comprehensive rules ever, period. Just because that creates some weird lines between our two organizations. However, if you're like running a planetary qualifier and you have an L5 or an L4 visiting, and like you're an L3, you're the head judge, and you have somebody who was head judge of regionals or head judge of Galactics or an appeals judge at Galactics, you can just be like, hey, I know that this is a 2-judge event. I'm the head judge because the TO knows me and they don't know who you are, but you can be my assistant head judge in case I get appealed. So rather than saying like L5s are assistant head judges at every event that they attend, if you as the tournament organizer or head judge want to promote somebody to that role, you can just be like, hey, I know that you have what it takes. You get to be an assistant head judge. However, something that is very valuable in having it be role-based rather than level-based is that it gives people opportunities to get experience. If you have, for example, if you're at a larger event, let's say you're at a sector qualifier, there's the head judge who's very experienced, and then you have two assistant, or you have another level 5 judge along with the head judge, and then there's a level 3 who's the assistant head judge. If only the assistant head judge is able to handle these things and not the level 5 who is not the head judge, it means that more people will go to that level 3 and they'll get more opportunities to learn and grow that the level 5 doesn't necessarily need. I know that some games have some programs and organizers say, for example, like on the team lead delegations, just be like, consult with a team lead or a level 3 for reversing decisions, gameplay disruptions, hidden card manipulation, errors, etc. This can delegate to team leads, can also delegate to floor judges. They don't have to only delegate to assistant head judges, appeals judges, and team leads. Some of their authority, it says head judges can delegate some of their responsibilities. And so you can delegate stuff like these consultations to judges based on level. But that would be a per event and per TO and per head judge decision, not a comprehensively defined rule. Spartan 5732 says, on tokens, I like to have at least 2 of each and dice. This way I have a way to show exhaust and ready token unit, and dice can be used for how many of each there are. But what happens if you then have to put damage on them, or you don't have enough dice or something? I don't know. But Loco667 says, all that high level talk, when can we become L3? So current plan is after the L2 updates and Scorekeeper come out, it'll be January. I'm going to spend a month or 2 on quality of life and polish. Hopefully we get the opportunity to onboard new people. My anticipation is L3 will launch in either late Q1 or early Q2. I have not yet built out the syllabus, and so I don't know how long it will take to run those courses before that level 3 exam is available. But if we get a subject matter expert, that likely accelerates when L3 is available. Having somebody internal who I can bounce ideas off of, or rather lock into a meeting with me and I talk at them for 4 hours while they say, yeah, can we just do work now? And they'll be like, okay, fine, we can do work. But having a subject matter expert will help accelerate L3. I don't know when that's happening. I have a drop dead date in my mind of when I'm going to start putting out L3 content, whether or not we have that subject matter expert. But if we are able to delay L3 until we do get that subject matter expert, I believe that the certification and educational materials will be significantly stronger for that delay. And so to be determined on when it's available. DeCaniel says, I overthought it. The delegating line covered. Thanks a lot. Sorry for the tangent. Never apologize for bringing me on a tangent. I love going on tangents. Also, I forgot that line existed. I forgot that line existed. And then I remembered it and I scrolled back up to it. Keep in mind that this is a 92-page document, and roughly, I don't know, probably 70 pages of it is new words. So not knowing everything, even if you wrote most of it, it's going to happen. Mayonnaise asks, any early mention of the advancement requirements, or has that not been determined? They are not set in stone. L3 will require some number of competitive events, being head judge of some number of competitive events. I don't think it is going to require attending a destination event, sectors or regionals. I might require it. That is to be determined. It will require the level 2 mentor certification, because as a head judge of larger planetary qualifiers, or team lead and working towards head judge of sector and regional qualifiers, you're going to be in a position where there are judges under your authority, and being able to evaluate and develop judges is going to be an important part of what you do. And there will also likely be a requirement for a submitted tournament report to demonstrate that you are able to cleanly describe the happenings of a tournament or an event, so that we know that if you do need to disqualify somebody, you're going to be able to write a statement that FFG can use to make a final decision on the player's future in the game. Train Target says his middle name is Tangent. I can neither confirm nor deny that. And Starkiller says, what, you don't remember everything you wrote? I certainly do not, especially stuff that I wrote months ago. Alrighty. Players, being aware of the contents of this document. I just like throwing in jokes here and there, and just little jokes like that. Alrighty. Players are also expected to provide photo identification when registering for competitive tier events, as requested by event leaders. Valid forms of identification are pretty much anything. Driver's license, state ID, passport, school ID cards, birth certificates, pretty much anything that has a name. And then you need to have your name linked to your UID. Players who are less than 16-year-old must present their ID while accompanied by a legal guardian in order to register for an event. This is mostly legalese. Legal decks. For an event utilizing constructed format, it is each player's responsibility to come prepared with a legal deck following the guidelines laid out in Section 9.1. Competitive and master tier events, players must store only the contents of their main deck and sideboard in their deck box. Additional cards will be considered a part of the sideboard with a few exceptions. Common bases used as tokens, cards that were distributed to players as part of that tournament, cards that are in a separate section of the deck box that are not accessed during the match, all cards in the deck box if the player presented their sideboard face down at the beginning of the match. Starkiller says, what ID should we provide for minors? If they, like, a school ID works, anything with their name on it, really. And this is, again, a legal requirement, not a practical one, and is generally going to be hand-waved. I don't know of a single tournament organizer who has actually required some form of physical ID. Train Target says, are tournament reports standard? I know they're not common for the public Discord. Are there internal ones happening already, or is this a future thing? So level 1 and higher judges have access to a tournament reports forum on Discord that has a bunch of tournament reports. I think they are generally tournament reports written by head judges of planetary qualifiers. Notably, your tournament report for level 3 will not need to be a head judge tournament report, and you can write a tournament report where you're a floor judge. That's something that I actually want to encourage people to do. So they already are happening. L1s have been writing them since October of last year. But in the L3 lessons, there will be some material talking about what is expected from a tournament report, similar to how there is a reviews rubric for the level 2 mentor role. Martha Lorax says, at sectors and regionals, SCG rule is parent counts as ID. Yeah, that's pretty common. If a parent says, this person is my child, this is the child's name, we believe them. Spartan 5732, we're not going to be able to change that little gap on the side, not with the tools that I have access in the middle of a live stream. Alrighty, so we need to have a legal deck. So, some cards that you can have some cards in your deck box as long as they are common bases. Cards that were given to players part of the tournament, that's generally going to be promos. But if somebody is like, hey, here's a pack for entry, everybody gets a pack for entry. If you have that random pack in your deck box, it's acceptable. We don't love it. But if you're like, yeah, this is the pack that I got, we allow it. Cards that are in a separate section of the deck box that is not accessed during the match, that's okay. The default Game-Genic dual deck boxes or dual deck pods have one cover that don't... if you take off the cover, you can access both areas. There are some dual deck pods that have two covers, and you can remove one cover and not access the other area. The cards in that unaccessed area are not considered to be accessed. And then all cards in the deck box, if the player presented their sideboard face down at the beginning of the match. We'll note later in tournament regulations, it's going to say during start of game procedure, players present their sideboard face down. Nobody's going to ever do that in real life. But if you do that, every card in your deck box isn't a part of your sideboard as long as you don't mix your sideboard in with those cards. If you then put your sideboard on top of your deck box, not back in your deck box, the cards in your deck box are not considered part of your sideboard because you presented your sideboard and it remains clearly separate. And that mitigates any potential for somebody to slip cards between this random pool of cards in their sideboard. For events utilizing a limited format, players are required to follow the rules and deck construction set forth in Section 9.2. Legal deck list. You have to have a deck list to play in competitive tier events. You also need one in limited tier events, but the requirements are slightly different. We need to know your name, first and last, your player UID. This is important particularly at larger events like Galactics. The larger the event gets, the more important it is to include your UID, because this is how we identify you when there are two people with the same name. at an event like a Planetary Qualifier, it is relatively unlikely that somebody doesn't has the same name as another player, and so if somebody doesn't write down their UID, you don't have to hunt them down for it. Same with at Galactics, unless you have, like, I don't know, 2 Mark Joneses, and you're like, okay, well, neither of you wrote down your UID. I have no idea which one of you is which. I need you to update this with your UID. Then you have your leader, your base, and the composition of your deck and sideboard. Speaking of, cards listed on deck list should be uniquely identifiable by only looking at the deck list. Unique cards should, they won't always be, but should be listed with their subtitle and or set and card number so that we know exactly what card you're talking about. The head judge of the event is the final authority on whether a card is sufficiently unambiguous. Later on in section 7, we're going to talk about card identification, but I'm going to talk about it right now because I like going on tangents. Let's say somebody is playing Anakin Data Vault, so red, white, green, and they register on their deck list 3x Karis. How many of you believe that this card is unambiguous and you know what card this player is playing? They write 3x Karis on their Anakin green, white, and red deck. I'm going to give folks a moment to respond, but I'm curious to know how many folks. Mayonnaise says it's okay in my opinion, not a force base. Super Rider's okay. Train Target says I know what it is, but I hate it. Mayonnaise says wrong colors. So I believe, without looking at the deck, this card is Karis Nemec, an aggression hero card, and that it is not Karis, the Vigilance Vility card. And so I wouldn't say that this is a deck list problem. I know what card we're talking about. If we wrote Anakin on it, even Anakin Skywalker, that is not sufficiently unambiguous because there are like 17 different Anakin Skywalkers, and most of them aren't playable in that deck. But there is enough ambiguity that I don't know what's happening. However, somebody is not going to play a double off aspect card when there is an on aspect card with the same name. Now, as more Karises and more Karis Nemecs get printed, the ambiguity there changes a little bit more. For example, right now, writing Greedo is that identifies the card. You don't need to write the subtitle or set and card number because there's only one Greedo in the game so far. But like Chewbacca, Anakin, Luke, there are so many variants that these very quickly become unambiguous. If somebody wrote neutral blue Anakin, that's probably fine. I know which one that is. Or like, if they're like LOF legendary Anakin because they can't remember its subtitle because they're writing it down like while they're driving to the event, this is unambiguous enough to me. I know what they're talking about. However, the head judge is the person who makes the decision of whether or not a card is unambiguous. A good barometer to determine whether or not it is ambiguous or not ambiguous is if you feel like you have to look at the deck itself. If you have to look at the deck to confirm that it's the card that you think it is, that is a sign that it is not unambiguous. Notably, for most Star Wars Unlimited events, deck lists are going to be registered through Melee, which gives you the subtitle automatically. And so it's very possible that they register, in fact, Karis, We Don't Like Strangers, which is a very different card from Karis Nemec, Rebel at Heart, or whatever it's like. I would still, if this is playing the Anakin Data Vault deck, there's a very good chance that I would, even though it is very clearly Karis, and like if I have the visual pop out, it's going to be this blue-black card and the subtitle is there, I don't think that they actually registered Karis. I think they registered Karis Nemec and just clicked the first thing that came up. That would be me as the head judge with the current set of cards that are available. I believe it is unambiguously not Karis, and it is in fact Karis Nemec, even though it is Karis, we don't like strangers on the deck list. But it is up to the head judge themselves. Card sleeves. Card sleeves are mandatory for a player's deck when playing in competitive or master tier events. Sleeves must be the same size and color or art design for any cards in the deck. If card sleeve breaks or is damaged enough to cause a marked card, it is the player's responsibility to place the sleeve immediately with a sleeve that is identical to the rest of the player's deck. Note that you no longer have to keep your sideboard sleeved up, and so if you have exactly 60 sleeves and you break one of them, you can just unsleeve a card from your sideboard and leave it unsleeved in your deck box, and then when you side it in, sleeve it up appropriately. We also have, there's a section later on that talks a little bit more about legal sleeves, but in this section we're just saying players have to have sleeves on their decks in competitive and master tier events. You are not allowed to play unsleeved at competitive and master tier because this helps mitigate both damage to cards and mark cards, and that is important enough for this level of events. You should also bring damage counters and tokens to support their side of the game. Damage counters for units and bases, initiative marker, experience, and shield tokens if necessary, epic action reminder tokens, other methods of tracking damage, such as dice instead of counters, are permitted so long as the game state is clear to all players at all times. Spectators. Alrighty. Spectators, God, we're still in participants. Holy crap. Okay, we're probably I don't know when we're stopping. We're going to keep on going. Everybody present at an event participates as a spectator when not actively engaging in another role. This includes casual observers who maybe never heard of the game. So if somebody's just walking into an LGS, they're a spectator, even if they don't know what Star Wars Unlimited is. They should not provide, they should not provide outside assistance. They should not disturb games. This can be difficult in the local game store environment. You may have, for example, your Star Wars Unlimited tournament over here, and then on the other side of them, you have some people playing Warhammer, and then over on the other side of the room, you have some people playing Dungeons and Dragons. Somebody gets a natural 20, somebody misses all their saves, and their Titan goes down, and people are getting very excited outside of the tournament. Generally, it shouldn't be disruptive. If somebody's being actively disruptive, you as a judge can be like, hey, this is causing problems for my players. If it's just loud, probably not disruptive, but if players are constantly looking over, that's a minor issue. You'll also note that at some very large events like the Galactic Championship, they're going to have spotlights that are dazzling and blind players and very distracting, and you cannot tell the coverage team for the Galactic Championship that they should turn off their lights and be quieter. They do not take well to being told what to do. But if a spectator witnesses a gameplay mistake at casual, relaxed, or competitive, they should call for a judge, and they may let the players know that they believe they saw an error. They should not say, I saw an error, you need to stop, here's what the error is, you missed your trigger, you're supposed to attack that, whatever. Because that leads to spectators accidentally providing outside assistance, whereas judges are much less likely to accidentally provide outside assistance. At master tier events, spectators should call for a judge, but not interrupt the match. Furthermore, if a player is like, hey, can you not watch my match? Spectators should respect that request. Alrighty, digital spectators. That's everybody who's watching a stream, recording, or digital footage of an event. Should not provide outside assistance to players during their games. So generally, players will not have access to electronic devices to receive information from digital spectators, but particularly bullet points 2 and 3, don't engage in harmful, inappropriate, or irrelevant conversations, and show respect to other digital spectators and people within the footage itself. This is also relevant for like footage that is provided afterwards. So like when coverage is put up on YouTube the next weekend, that falls under digital spectators. Finally, we have influencers and media. These are people who provide commentary during game, record stuff, all the same stuff as media staff. However, are not official media staff. They have, they should, again, generally just be respectful, follow the same requirements as other spectators, and should obtain consent from both tournament organizer and anybody that they are recording. This means that if you just have like your phone over your match and you're recording every match, you should ask your opponent, hey, is it okay if I record our gameplay? And if they say no, you should not be recording that match. Also, minors cannot be interviewed by unofficial influencers media. Gameplay cannot be recorded or streamed by anyone other than official media staff without exception. This is, again, a legal and liability concern. Performing multiple roles. Alrighty. Certain participants can engage in multiple roles. Everybody's a spectator at one point or another. At any competitive or master tier event, we already talked about this, players cannot perform any leader role. At relaxed and casual, players can also be leaders. I know that this was something that a lot of people, one, requested, and two, did anyways, even though they knew it wasn't allowed. And then tournament organizer must perform the duties of each other required leader role that they have not designated someone to fill. And they cannot perform any non-leader role except on-site spectator. The person who decides what the prize support is and what the entry fee is and how judges are compensated generally doesn't get to participate in play itself, which is, I understand, disappointing, but they have undue authority over the rest of the event. Alrighty, page 20 of 92. Let me check how long this section is. We can get through. Oh yeah, we can easily get through section 4 today. 1 second while I check the internet. Alrighty, so material legality. Cards. Let's talk about legal cards. Cards are legal for tournament play the same day the set is officially released. This does mean this overrules the specific listing of legality later on the document. So if they don't update it in a timely manner, new cards are legal. We're not going to have that silly jump to light speed question again. Cards obtained at a pre-release event are only legal for the event that they were obtained in and are not legal for any other event. Cards that have been released in a previous set that have not been reprinted are legal to be used even while the rest of that set is not yet legal. And so if you're able to get a card from a Lawless Time at pre-release that was printed in Legends of the Force as well, you can play that card in your Premier deck at an event before Lawless Time becomes legal. There's some stuff. Ooh. MJ6 Music says, are you planning on going through the entire doc on stream over multiple streams? Given that it has been let me check my time. Yeah, given that it's been 2 hours and we're 20 pages through, definitely going to be multiple streams. And yeah, the plan is the entire document. It's going to take a while because I'm apparently a little bit of a chatterbug, and turns out there's a lot of document. Card legality is relatively straightforward. So as I'm going through it, I'm trying to figure out where I can cut corners, because some of it, it's like, this hasn't changed, this is unmodified, this is straightforward. We do have some new language, I believe, regarding materials in other languages. Players that can include cards in any number of languages. This is now explicit. So long as each card is a legal, officially released Star Wars Unlimited card, provided that the player is not using them to create an advantage through unclear communication. And so if you're playing cards so that your opponent doesn't know what your cards do, and you are taking advantage of that, that is not allowed, and we're going to ask you to find replacement cards. However, if you play cards in a mix of the languages that the game is published in, because those are the cards that you have access to, or because you think their names sound funny in the other languages because they're just not what you're used to, or you think that it's really funny that, for example, okay, so here we're going to go on a tangent. I've done this tangent before on stream, but red 3 in French, you would expect, and please pardon my horrible French, you would expect that red 3, when translated to French, would be rouge trois. Instead, it is, I can't remember, I believe it is translated to rouge 3, because part of it is a proper name. It might be red trois, but part of it is a proper name, part of it is something that can be translated, and so some of it is translated, and it's the funniest thing to me. Not the words themselves, but the fact that half of the name is translated. In any case, if a player plays the card and says, here's the entire text of the card, or like, here, I have English language, or like, I have the entire deck in German in like the other section of my deck box, so in case you have any questions what any of the cards can do, I can provide you our German card here in Germany. However, I like playing a mix of cards in different languages because these, like, I was only able to get hyperfoils of everything by grabbing a mix of different languages, because I don't care what the language is, but if you want to read the card, here is consistent all German or all English or whatever, as long as the player is going out of their way or is not causing confusion with this, or they're just like, hey, this is Anakin, here's all the text on Anakin, let me know if you have any questions, and they're very clear and proactive about not causing communication issues, players can play in multiple languages. If a player asks for clarification about the abilities of a card in a language they don't understand, the official English version of that card is used as reference. Something that unfortunately happens with every game that is translated into multiple languages is that cards are mistranslated, sometimes nuance is missed, sometimes words are just missing. You might notice in this document that there are a lot of places where words are missing. When translating an entire set of cards, there's a whole lot of words, and it's very easy for your brain to put in a word and you just miss it because it's obviously there. And when you're reviewing a translation, it's very easy to also miss that word because you just put it in there because you know the word belongs there. And so the official English version is the closest thing we have to official language of a card. You would reference the official card database in case there have been errata or changes, for example, on Sly Moore or Blizzard Assault AT-AT. Train Target says, would proof of translation cards be an exception to having spare cards in the main deck compartment if separate from the sideboard, divider, different sleeves, etc.? They would have to be explicitly presented in some way or explicitly separated. So if they are in a different inaccessible section, or if you say, hey, I'm running like if you sit down for your match and say, hey, I'm playing cards in a bunch of different languages, I have one copy of every card in English in this deck box over here, or in this compartment in my deck box, they are not part of my sideboard, they are in yellow sleeves, the rest of my deck is in blue sleeves, then that is a reasonable thing to have. Really, as long as you are clear to your opponent what those extra cards in your deck box are, anything can be in your deck box. For example, you can say, hey, these 50 cards are my main deck, these 10 cards are my sideboard, and these 50 cards in my deck box are cards that I cut from my deck last night that I was playing in a tournament yesterday. You can have cards that would otherwise be reasonable to play in your deck, whether they be translation cards or cards that you simply cut from your deck, as long as you're clear that they are not part of your deck. The idea of this policy is that while I am sideboarding, and while I'm sitting over here with my stack of cards thinking about what to take in, what to take out, I don't have to be paying attention to what you are doing on the other side of the table. Because if you're part of sideboarding is players rooting around in their deck box, flipping through the cards, trying to pull out what they want. And if you have miscellaneous cards in your deck box and you're rooting around in your deck box, I, as a player, now need to pay attention to what you are doing while sideboarding, and that takes away from my ability to sideboard. However, if you say, hey, these 10 cards are my sideboard, these are my 50, and then you go diving into your deck box, I'm like, hey, you said those 10 cards are your sideboard. Why are you in your deck box? All I need to know is they shouldn't be diving into their deck box, or this is what all of the cards are. So if it's laid out in advance, it reduces the burden on the player of what they need to be paying attention to, and they can focus more on their sideboarding. So proof of translation cards would be something reasonable to have in a main deck compartment, as long as you're identifying them as proof of translation cards. Alrighty. Artistic modifications and alterations. Players can have cards that are autographed so long as the autograph is on the front of the card, so not on the Star Wars Unlimited card face, or either side of the card is double-sided, so leaders. If the autograph covers up any amount of text on the card, the player should have an additional copy of the card on hand that is unmarked for their opponent to reference. No other alterations are allowed regardless of the event here. This is a slight change to existing alteration policy. Before, you couldn't have any text obscured by autographs. Now you can have text obscured by the autographs as long as you have another copy of the card to show people so that they can read the card. There's some weird lines regarding altered cards. This is, again, mostly a legal choice because licensed Star Wars art is not licensed to be modified. And so FFG, due to licensing restrictions, to the best of my understanding, can't say, yes, you're allowed to modify this artwork, but they do allow signatures. So that alter policy is not likely to be changed for unsanctioned events, so run by people who are not partners of FFG, who are not official tournament organizers of FFG. They can have different policies, but for official events and for unofficial events run by official partners of FFG, this is what the alter policy is going to be. Alrighty. Proxy cards. Proxy cards are used here in competition to represent otherwise legal cards, often a substitute for a card that can no longer be included in the deck without the deck being marked, or if a card is missing. If a card has been damaged or excessively worn in a current tournament, there's a manufacturing defect for which no defect-free replacements exist, or the card has been lost throughout the course of the event. A proxy can be used to replace that card. Proxies cannot replace cards that the owner has damaged intentionally or through negligence. These terms are very vague. Proxies can also not be used to replace cards a player does not or did not begin the event with, essentially. So you can't show up and be like, hey, I forgot my deck at home. Can you write up 50 proxies for me? Players are also not permitted to create or use their own proxy cards. A judge proxy must be created by the head judge, who, at their discretion, will determine if the creation of judge proxy is appropriate. Proxies need to be marked clearly and conspicuously. And if the original card is present, that card needs to be kept as a reference card. If the original card is lost, a reference copy should be printed. DeCaniel says, we regularly have the debate in my community about custom artwork at Planetary Qualifier and below. Would you enforce the alter policy in Planetary Qualifier or Showdowns? I'm usually drawing the line if it is a stream table. So this is personal opinion. If the card is an authentic card, I don't have a problem with alterations to the card. If the card is a non-authentic card, I will not allow it, full stop. And so, like, the player has to own the actual card. That's it. That falls under the next section, which is counterfeit cards. So, counterfeit cards, fake cards that are created by third-party entities that can resemble officially released cards, cannot be used as your leader, base, and are also not permitted in your main deck or sideboard in an official tournament. I know that a lot of people like using like third-party arts for their leaders and bases. I think very, very few people use them in their decks. They also do not have to, like, having custom art leader or custom art bait, that's a counterfeit. It is not a Star Wars Unlimited card. Your deck needs to be Star Wars Unlimited cards, and that is something that I will enforce at any tier of play. If somebody like doodled, like they took their Rey and like painted her lightsaber red because they wanted to have Darth Rey, I'm not going to complain about that at like my LGS, because it is still verifiably an authentic card. But at competitive tier play, I would not allow it, especially if there's any sort of broadcasting. Even if a player owns an official copy of a card, they cannot include counterfeit cards as their leader base or in their main deck sideboard. Per policy, if somebody is determined to be playing counterfeit cards, this is considered a form of cheating. And so the judge should make a determination whether or not the player is aware that they were not allowed to do so, and whether or not they were aware that the cards that they were playing were counterfeit. Some players will not realize that their cards were counterfeit, and therefore they are not cheating because they didn't know they did something wrong. And similarly, some players may not be aware that they're not allowed to have like these Utsi altars as their leader at weekly play. And again, they're not cheating because they didn't know they weren't allowed to. If they're unknowingly playing with counterfeit cards or knowingly playing with counterfeit cards but did not know that that was not allowed, it's treated as a deck error, and you can see the competitive policy guide or the relaxed policy guide to see how we handle that. Starkiller says, what about token units bought from a third party? Tokens and damage counters do not need to be authentic. Those aren't something we check for those don't need to be authentic is the short answer for that. They are not considered cards in your deck. And running, like, if you get like RK Post clone tokens or Axel, oh god, I can't remember Axel's last name, but the artist from Star Wars Unlimited, to draw up some like battle droids on a sheet of scrap paper, and you're like, these are my battle droid tokens. Entirely fine. I mean, you can also use like a Skittle as, yes, Hut. Thank you. Axel Hut. You can also use like a Skittle as like shield tokens, right? Or as damage counters. It doesn't have to be authentic materials for the accessories. Damage tokens, counters, etc. Do not need to be authentic, whereas cards being played in the game do need to be authentic. One of the reasons I'm hardline about this is because this is a way for a game to undermine itself. If at any point you allow players to play cards that are not authentic in events, players no longer need to have authentic cards, and that undermines the entire game being published. Also, Star Wars cards are generally relatively accessible in price compared to many other trading card games, and so players should be able to have access to these cards. Players want, and then if somebody's like, well, I have the authentic card, I just want to play with this shiny version, you need to play with the authentic card in an official tournament. That's just the line. I know it'll disappoint some people, but you can play the fun cards at home. Finally, misaligned cards. Some cards can be manufactured such that the attributes are not aligned, or even such that the attributes of another card are present. A card that is misaligned in this way is considered to be the card that has its full name and subtitle present. If no card, or if multiple cards have their name and subtitle present, it is not considered to be a card for the purposes of a tournament. A player is not allowed to use ambiguity in misaligned cards to gain an advantage. The head judge's final authority on determining which cards are valid for tournament play and their identification. This has become more of a concern with the release of the uncut sheets from Sector Qualifiers Regional Championship this past fall. Many games release uncut sheets as prizes. They're very cool. As soon as they get into the hands of players, somebody is going to cut up that sheet because the cards on it do have some value, and you can cut it so that you can have very clearly miscut cards. So you have the art of one card in the name of another, or what have you. However, given the way that Star Wars cards have their names on them in different places, depending on whether or not they're prestige variants or upgrades having their names at the bottom of the card, there needs to be one name and subtitle, and that is the identity of the card. That is how we identify a card. If a card is weirdly cut so it has multiple names on it, which is definitely a possibility, if you have like the bottom half of an upgrade and the top half of a unit, it'll have two different names on it. That is not a card for the purposes of a tournament. Similarly, if it is like some weird like showcase or prestige variant where the name's along the side and then the one next to it has the name across the other side and all we see is art and text box and no name, that's not a card for the purpose of a tournament. The head judge gets to decide what is and isn't a card if cards are miscut. I don't think that this is something that's going to come up hugely, but I think that at the next couple of waves of larger destination events, some players will start to show with miscut cards. Alrighty. As discussed in the player section, sleeves are required. What are legal material sleeves? So, sleeves on the deck must be identical in size, color, art design, while also ensuring that the deck is not marked. Cards in the sideboard do not need to be sleeved. However, if any cards leave the sideboard between games or somehow during a game, we don't currently have anything that pulls from the sideboard during a game, but if anything is added to the deck, they need to be unmarked. Sleeves with highly reflective backs and holographic fronts are not permitted. Things that are reflective can accidentally give information to players that they should not have, or obscure information just a little bit too much. Sleeves with graphics on the front. So on the part that this is not a Star Wars card, but if you have graphics on the front, like some have like a little pattern along the edge, outer sleeves often have this. Those are not permitted if they make it difficult to see the card text. If you're still able to see the card text, we allow those. For officially streamed or recorded games, sleeves are required to be either solid colors with no artwork or officially licensed Star Wars Unlimited sleeves. Note that this is only for official streamed and recorded games. Official streams are those sponsored by FFG or Asmodee. If the tournament organizer is sponsoring, like most Planetary Qualifier streams are not official streams. They are fan-run streams and therefore do not fall under this requirement. This is because FFG is they have broadcast rights to some things. They are very careful about it. And so you're going to see, for example, the Galactic Championships, the sleeves are going to be either solid colors or Star Wars Unlimited sleeves, whereas at Planetary Qualifiers, you can have a lot more flexibility in what players have. Also, a judge may, at their discretion, deem certain art sleeves to be inappropriate and request that a player replace them with an acceptable alternative. All cards in the deck must be put into sleeves with an identical orientation. If somebody hasn't done so and the deck isn't marked, just ask them to put them into the deck in the same orientation. No more than one card in a sleeve at a time, and cards may be double or triple sleeved as long as the extra sleeves are clear with no additional markings on them, and cards are sleeved in the same way. As long as cards aren't marked, cards are sleeved in the same way. That's really the goal here. We just spell it out in a lot of different ways to help enforce that consistency. Game mats. Players are permitted to use game mats during their matches. For officially streamed or recorded games, game mats are required to be either solid colors with no artwork on them or officially licensed Star Wars Unlimited game mats. As before, it needs to be artwork. If it is an FFG stream or an FFG sponsored stream, it needs to be something that they have the license to broadcast. And like with sleeves, a judge may at their discretion determine that game mat's not appropriate and tell somebody to put it away. And they must use an alternative game mat or no game mat if one is not available. At destination events like Sectors, Regionals, and Galactics, there's very often a participation playmat, and so players should generally have access to a playmat. But also, when I started playing TCGs, we didn't have sleeves or playmats. We just played on concrete and dirt, so you can play on a table without a game mat for a round or two. All right, we've made it to page 22. hop back up to this table of contents. Yeah, we made it all the way through material legality. We're looking at the time. Yeah, we got through 4 sections. I think 4 sections is a good pause point for the day. I think tomorrow we're going to come back. So we're going to be honest here. I want to watch the Game Awards tomorrow. And so what we'll probably do is a couple hours before the Game Awards, going to take a break for the Game Awards, and come back for a couple hours after the Game Awards. We're going to pick back up with our next section, starting with section 5. I think probably we can do sections like 5 and 6 in one, and then 7 through 10 in another. Yeah, I believe in us. But we'll pick back up tomorrow, starting in... let me double check. Let me get a start time for all of you before the stream ends. Come on. Tell me what time the Game Awards are tomorrow, Internet. Oh boy. Game Awards don't start until 7:30 Eastern tomorrow. So I'm probably going to start around 1 or 2 Eastern. Go for like 5 hours because we're going to have some time to get through stuff. Then I'll watch the Game Awards. And then probably I might continue. I might also just go to sleep afterwards because it's going to be closer to the end of the day. And we'll pick up with more later on. But 1 o'clock Eastern, I'm going to put that information into the Discord in case you want to come back for more of the new comprehensive event guide. Thank you all for joining me. If you have any last-minute questions, now's the time to share them. Otherwise, I'll see you back here tomorrow to continue talking, starting with Section 5. Martha Lorax says, will tomorrow be recorded for a VOD? Yep. All of these will be uploaded to YouTube after each section is done and saved as a VOD. And I'll probably put together a playlist of them so that if you miss any of them, you can sit down and watch them back to back to back. I'm also working on updating the level 2 lessons. These live broadcasts do take away from the time that I spend on said lessons. But it also helps me get a little bit more comfortable with the document, as well as more aware of the questions that folks are asking about particular sections of the document. But other than that, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you folks tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern for more comprehensive event guide.